The tower had no door. It never had. Liora pressed her palm against the cold stone, the way she had done every morning for as long as she could remember, and whispered the same question she had asked 10,000 times before. "Why won't you let me see the sky without a wall between us?" No one answered. No one ever did. 200 years she had lived inside these silver walls, watching the seasons change through a single window carved too high to reach without climbing. 200 years of her father's voice drifting up the stairwell, soft and aching, saying the same words like a prayer he needed more than she did. "I do this because I love you." Tonight, for the first time, she would learn that love and imprisonment can wear the same face, and that the man who called himself her protector had built her prison with his own trembling hands, out of a fear he never had the courage to name. She did not know yet that a stranger's footsteps were already crossing the forest below, coming for a girl he did not know existed. She did not know that before the next moon rose, the wall between her and the world would finally, terribly, break. She only knew that tonight she was going to climb out the window. Before we go further, if this story already has its hooks in you, subscribe to Elf Stories, leave a like, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. Liora had never touched rain. She knew its sound. She had memorized it, note by note, the way it tapped against the roof of the ivory spire like fingers asking to be let in. She knew its smell, carried up through the one window that opened, thin and green and alive. But she had never once felt it land on her skin. And there were nights she lay awake aching for something so small. It embarrassed her to want it so badly. She was not a prisoner in chains. She told herself that often, because it was easier than the alternative. There were no chains, no locks she could see, no guards who raised their voices. There was only her father's love, wrapped so tightly around her that she had never learned where his fear ended and her own life began. King Valen visited her every evening. He always came alone, always after sunset, always with the same tired kindness in his eyes, the kindness of a man who has convinced himself that suffering, given gently enough, is not suffering at all. "Tell me about the world," she would ask him, and he would tell her stories instead. Stories of kingdoms and rivers and forests she had never walked through, softened at every edge, careful never to mention danger, careful never to explain why she could not go and see these things herself. He gave her the world in miniature, folded small enough to fit inside a tower room, and called it a gift. She loved him. That was the cruelest part of it. She loved him with the whole unguarded heart of a daughter who had never been given a reason not to. And so her anger, when it came, always arrived wearing the shape of guilt. What she feared most was not the tower itself. It was the quiet suspicion, grown patient over 2 centuries, that she had been shaped by these walls into someone who no longer knew how to want anything outside them. She feared she had forgotten how to reach for a door because she had stopped believing doors were meant for her. She kept a small collection of things smuggled up by kind servants over the decades. A pressed flower from the eastern hills, a chipped stone from a riverbed, a single feather she had never learned to name. She arranged them on her windowsill, like relics of a country she had been exiled from before she was ever allowed to visit it. Sometimes she pretended the objects were doors. She would hold the stone and imagine the river it came from. Imagine cold water rushing over bare feet. Imagine a life measured in footsteps instead of days. Then she would set it down, and the tower would still be the tower, and she would still be the girl no one had ever let leave it. She believed, quietly and without proof, that something was wrong with her, not injured. Wrong. That whatever her father feared, he feared it about her, not merely for her. And the difference between those two things had haunted her since she was young enough to first notice the servant's eyes drop whenever she asked why. She had asked her father once, only once, if she was dangerous. He had gone very pale and very still and said, "You are precious," which was not an answer, which she had understood. Even then, was a door closing so gently she almost didn't hear the latch. Isa was the only person who had never learned to look away from her. The old servant had cared for Liora since the night her mother died, a night Liora did not remember, only knew as a single word passed between servants in whispers, always followed by silence whenever she entered a room. Isa combed her hair in the mornings, the way a mother might have, and in the evenings when the spire grew quiet. She sometimes told Liora small, forbidden things. Not secrets exactly, only fragments the king had never explicitly ordered kept from her. "Your mother used to sing in the garden below," Isa told her once, braiding a length of Liora's hair with careful practiced hands, a voice like water over stone. "Your father built this tower a year after she passed. I have always believed, though I have never dared to say it to his face, that he was not protecting you from the world, so much as protecting himself from losing another thing he loved to it. Then why not simply love me less?" Liora had asked, half a joke, half a wound. Isa had not laughed, because loving you less was never something your father knew how to do, only loving you carefully enough to make sure it never cost him anything again. Liora turned that answer over for years afterward, the way she turned the river, stone over in her palm, searching for an edge she could finally hold on to. It explained everything and nothing at once. It explained a father's fear. It did not explain why his fear had to become her whole world. There were other servants, quieter ones, more cautious ones, who treated her with the careful, distant courtesy, reserved for something fragile and slightly frightening at once. She had grown used to the way conversations shifted when she entered a room, the way certain questions were met with too quick smiles and too fast subject changes. She had grown used to being loved as a concept and handled as a rumor. She spent her mornings in the small garden terrace 2 floors below her chamber, the only outdoor space she was permitted, walled on every side, open only to the sky directly above. She had memorized every flower that grew there, had named the birds that occasionally landed on the railing before flying somewhere she could not follow. She envied them with an intensity that frightened her, the ease with which they simply lifted into the air and were gone. In the evenings before her father's visits, she practiced being someone who did not want anything more than what she already had. She practiced it the way one practices a difficult piece of music, failing at it nightly, trying again out of sheer stubbornness. She had become, without meaning to, extraordinarily skilled at performing contentment for an audience of one worried king. "You seem happy tonight," Valen told her once, relief plain in his voice, and she had smiled and said yes, and hated herself a little for how easily the lie came. If you are still here with me, subscribe to Elf Stories, take a moment to like this story, and tell me where in the world you're listening from. It helps Elf Stories more than you know, and there is far more of Liora's story still to come. That night, as every night, she stood at her window and watched the forest breathe in the dark, and told herself that tomorrow nothing would change. She had told herself that for 200 years. She had almost stopped noticing that it was a lie, until the night the arrow flew, and the forest, for the first time in her memory, answered back. The arrow came first, and the man came after it. Liora heard the commotion before she understood it, shouts rising thin through the trees, the panicked calls of the spire's guards, a sound she had never once heard in 2 centuries of silence, the sound of something unplanned. She climbed the narrow stair to her window and pressed herself against the frame, and there, at the tree line where the forest met the clearing below the tower, she saw a man fall. He was not one of her father's people. His ears were rounded, his armor foreign, his hand pressed hard against a wound at his side that bloomed red through his fingers. A human. She had heard the word before, always spoken carefully, always followed by a warning she had never understood the shape of. The guards moved to finish what the arrow had started. She did not decide to stop them. She simply found herself screaming down from the window before her mind had caught up with her voice, and something in the desperate human panic of it made the captain of the guard hesitate just long enough. That hesitation saved the man's life. She did not see him again for 3 days. In that time, she learned, through fragments overheard from servants who forgot how thin the tower walls were, through her father's uncharacteristic absence, through the strange, restless tension that had settled over the spire like weather, that the man had been brought inside to be healed rather than buried, and that no one, least of all her father, seemed to know quite why. On the 3rd night, a servant she trusted, an old woman named Isa, who had cared for Liora since infancy, slipped up the stairs with more than food. "He is asking about you," Isa whispered. "The human. He says a girl's voice saved his life, and he wants to thank her." "That's impossible. No one is allowed near me." Isa's face did something complicated. Grief and defiance both at once. "Your father has forbidden it, which is exactly why I think you should go." Liora had never disobeyed her father. Not once, not in 200 years. Not even in the smallest, safest ways available to her. Obedience had been so total, for so long, that she had never had the chance to discover whether she possessed the courage to break it. She discovered that night that she did. Isa led her down a servant's passage she had never known existed. Proof, quiet and damning, that the tower had always contained more freedom than she had been permitted to find, and into a small healing chamber where a man lay propped against pillows, pale but breathing, his eyes finding hers the instant she stepped through the door. "You're the one who screamed," he said. "Not a question. You're the one who almost died because a guard is faster at drawing a blade than I am at drawing breath." A laugh cracked out of him, surprised and pained. "I'm Darren. I owe you a debt I don't know how to repay, a woman I'm not allowed to know the name of." "Liora," she said, before she could think better of it. And something about saying her own name to a stranger, freely without her father's permission standing between the word and the world, felt more dangerous and more thrilling than anything she had done in 2 centuries. She did not know yet that Darren was not simply a lost traveler caught by an arrow. She did not know that he had come to these woods searching for something her father had spent 200 years trying to bury. She only knew that for the first time in her memory, someone was looking at her not as something to be protected, but as someone worth knowing. She lingered in the doorway of the healing chamber longer than she meant to that first night, memorizing small, unimportant things. The way his hand still trembled faintly from blood loss, the careless dark curl of hair against his forehead, the particular directness of his gaze, which held hers without the practiced deference every elf in the spire had been trained to show her. He did not know to be careful with her. It was, she realized with something like wonder, the first honest conversation she had ever had. "You shouldn't be here," she said, even as she made no move to leave. "Neither should I be alive," he said. "So I suppose we're both breaking some kind of rule tonight." She left before the guards changed watch, her heart beating in a rhythm she did not recognize. Equal parts terror and something bright and unfamiliar. She refused, that first night, to name. The following day passed unbearably slowly. She sat through her father's evening visit, only half listening, nodding at the right moments, her mind circling back again and again to the small healing chamber 2 floors below, to a stranger's voice asking her name as though it were the most natural question in the world. Word moved through the spire the way it always did, quietly, carefully, filtered through servants too loyal to gossip openly, but too human, even among elves, not to whisper at all. She overheard fragments, that the human had been found near the old boundary stones, the ones marking land no traveler crossed by accident, that the captain of the guard had wanted him executed on sight, and that her father, strangely, had overruled him, that King Valen had gone to see the stranger alone, late at night, and left the healing chamber looking as though he had seen a ghost. None of it made sense to her yet. All of it made her more determined to return. On the third night, when Issa came to her with more than food, Liora did not hesitate the way she once might have. Something in her, some old and patient thing, had already decided. The servants' passage Issa led her through was narrow and cold, unused long enough that dust lay thick along the walls, disturbed only by their footsteps. This tower has always had more doors than your father wanted you to know about. Issa murmured, as much confession as warning. I have carried that guilt a long time, Liora. Perhaps tonight I finally do something useful with it. The healing chamber, when they reached it, was lit by a single low lamp. Darren was awake, propped against pillows, and something in his face shifted when he saw her. Surprise first, and then unmistakably relief. You're the one who screamed, he said. Not a question. You're the one who almost died because a guard is faster at drawing a blade than I am at drawing breath. A laugh cracked out of him, surprised and pained. I'm Darren. I owe a debt I don't know how to repay to a woman I'm not allowed to know the name of. Liora, she said, before she could think better of it, and something about saying her own name to a stranger, freely, without her father's permission standing between the word and the world, felt more dangerous and more thrilling than anything she had done in 2 centuries. They spoke for over an hour that first true night. Though neither of them said anything they would later remember as significant, he asked what season she liked best, and she admitted, quietly ashamed, that she had never experienced one outside the tower's single window and could not honestly say. He did not laugh at her. He simply nodded, filing the answer away the way you file away something you intend to fix. She did not know yet that Darren was not simply a lost traveler caught by an arrow. She did not know that he had come to these woods searching for something her father had spent 200 years trying to bury. A truth so carefully hidden that even the guards who watched her day and night did not know its shape. She only knew that for the first time in her memory, someone was looking at her not as something to be protected, but as someone worth knowing. If they let her keep talking to him, everything would change. She could feel it already, the way you feel a storm before the sky admits to it. What was her father so afraid this stranger would tell her? If this story has its claws in you already, hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell me where you're listening from tonight. Elf Stories has many more tales like this one waiting for you. She returned the next night, and the night after that. Issa never asked questions, only stood watch at the passage entrance with the resigned expression of a woman who had decided, after 200 years of silence, that some rules were worth the risk of breaking. Darren healed slowly, and in the slowness, something else grew. Not the fast, breathless infatuation Liora had read about in the handful of old books her father allowed her. This was quieter, built from small things. The way he asked about her life without flinching at the strangeness of it. The way he never once treated her isolation as ordinary. The way everyone else in the spire had trained themselves to. 200 years, he said one night, disbelief still fresh in his voice even after a week of hearing it. And you've never left this tower once. My father says it's to protect me. From what? She did not have an answer. That was the wound beneath the wound. Not the tower itself, but the fact that after 2 centuries, she still did not know what she was being protected from. Only that the not knowing had become its own kind of cage. Darren did not pity her. That was what she noticed most, and what she came to treasure most in the weeks that followed. He looked at her the way you look at someone whose strength you respect, not someone whose suffering you're cataloging. He asked about the things she loved, rather than the things she'd lost. What would you do? He asked her once, If the door just opened? No danger, no catch. If you could walk out right now. She thought about it longer than she meant to. I don't know. I've spent so long imagining the world in pieces. A river here, a mountain there, that I don't know if I could imagine it whole. I think I'd be afraid of it being too big. It is too big, he said gently. That's what makes it worth seeing. There were nights they said very little at all. Nights she simply sat near enough to feel the warmth of another living person beside her, something she had not experienced since childhood. When her mother was still alive to hold her, there was a particular silence that grew between them. Not empty, but full. The kind of silence two people build when neither wants to be the one to end it. She began to notice small things about herself she hadn't before. The particular ache of missing someone during the hours she couldn't see him. The way her chest tightened pleasantly when Issa announced it was time to descend the passage again. She had no name for these feelings, beyond the one she was afraid to use, because using it meant admitting how much she had already given away. He asked her one night to describe the pressed flower on her windowsill, the one from the eastern hills a kind servant had smuggled to her decades ago. She described its color from memory, faded now to something between gold and gray, and the particular curl of its dried petals, and he listened with the rapt attention of a man being told something far more important than a flower. When you leave this tower, he said, and you will, I intend to take you to the exact hill that flower came from. I want to watch you see the whole field it grew in, not just the one piece someone thought to save for you. You say when as though it's certain. I say it, he said, because I've decided it's going to be true, and I'm stubborn enough that things tend to arrange themselves around what I decide. She laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, the kind she hadn't allowed herself in longer than she could remember. It startled Issa, standing watch by the passage door, who glanced back at the sound, with an expression Liora would later understand as quiet, aching hope. Not every night was easy. There was a night Darren grew quiet and distant, staring at nothing, and when she pressed him gently for the cause, he only said, I keep thinking about how much of your life has already happened without you in it. 200 years, Liora. I've lived less than a quarter of that, and I feel as though I've seen more of the world by accident than you've seen on purpose. She had not known how to answer that. She had simply reached out without deciding to, and laid her hand over his, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything else. There was another night when the old captain of the guard, a stern elf named Thesix, who had served her father since before Leora's birth, passed close enough to the healing chamber that both of them fell into frightened silence, listening to his footsteps recede down the corridor. He suspects something, Issa admitted afterward, her voice tight. I have seen that look on his face before. He is loyal to your father in a way that frightens me more than open cruelty ever could. But even as the connection deepened, the walls around them grew more visible, not less. The guards' patrols near the healing chamber increased. Issa's warnings grew sharper. Her father was asking questions, noticing absences he could not yet explain. And Darren, healed enough now to stand, began speaking less about escape and more about something he seemed afraid to say outright, that his presence in these woods had never been an accident. Liora, he said one night, voice low, careful. There's something about why I came here. Something about your father. I don't think I should be the one to tell you, but I don't know how much longer I'll be allowed to stay silent about it either. Before she could ask what he meant, footsteps sounded on the stair above them. Familiar, heavy, unmistakable. Her father was coming. If you're still here with me, subscribe to Elf Stories. There are many more unforgettable tales waiting to be told, and this one is only just beginning to unravel. King Valen did not shout. He never did. He simply stood in the doorway of the healing chamber, taking in the sight of his daughter seated beside the human stranger, and something in his face collapsed inward like a wall, giving way from the inside. "Liora, come away from him. Father, now." She did not move. It was the smallest act of defiance she had ever committed, and it felt larger than anything else she had done in 2 centuries combined. Valen's eyes went to her, then to Darren, and something passed between the 2 men that Liora did not understand. Recognition, maybe, or dread. "You know him," she said slowly. "You already know who he is." Valen's silence answered before his voice did. "Issa, take her back to the spire. I'm not a child to be carried away," Liora said, and her voice shook with something that was not quite anger and not quite grief. "I am 200 years old, Father. I have never once asked you for anything beyond what you offered me. Tell me why this man frightens you." For a moment, she thought he might. His mouth opened, and something raw moved behind his eyes. The particular exhaustion of a man who has carried a secret so long, it has become heavier than the truth it was meant to protect. Then he closed his mouth again, and the moment passed, and he was only a king once more. "Because love makes people reckless," he said quietly, "and I have already lost enough." He did not explain what he meant. He simply turned and left, and 2 guards remained behind. Not to harm Darren, she realized with a chill, but to watch him, to make certain nothing more passed between them than words. The days that followed were the loneliest of her long life, made lonelier by the fact that she now knew with painful clarity exactly what she was missing. She was permitted no more visits to the healing chamber. Issa was reassigned to duties on the far side of the spire, and Liora understood without being told that this too was a punishment, not for her alone, but for the old woman who had dared to open a door. Thesic himself came to stand watch outside her chamber some nights, a silent, immovable presence at her door that said, without a single word, exactly how far her father was willing to go. She tried, once, to reason with him, appealed to whatever loyalty might exist beneath his stern discipline, and he only looked at her with something that might almost have been pity. "Your father has protected this kingdom for 600 years, Thesic said. "I have watched him make harder choices than this one. Do not mistake his caution for cruelty, my lady. I have seen what cruelty looks like on him, and this is not it. This is a man trying not to lose the last piece of his heart he has left. And what am I supposed to do with a heart that's never been allowed to live?" she had asked, and Thesic had no answer for that, only turned his gaze back to the corridor and said nothing more. She found other ways. A folded note passed through a servant too young to know better, a whispered message carried on the back of a kindness someone else owed her. Slowly, carefully, she and Darren kept their fragile connection alive. Across a distance her father had built specifically to break it. It was in one of these smuggled notes that Darren finally told her the truth he had been circling for weeks. "I did not come to these woods by chance. I was sent by my people to find the daughter your father has hidden for 2 centuries. A girl, the old prophecies say, was never meant to survive her birth. I did not know when I came that finding you would mean losing myself to you instead. I have thought, more than once, about tearing this note up before it ever reaches you. It would be easier for both of us if I let you keep believing I came here by accident. But I have watched you spend your whole life being protected from truths other people decided you couldn't carry, and I refuse to become one more person who does that to you, however gently I might tell myself I'm doing it out of love." She read the words a dozen times before their meaning fully settled. A prophecy. Something about her birth. Something her father had spent 200 years trying to bury inside a tower with no door. She thought of every careful story he had ever told her, every question he had ever deflected, every time his eyes had gone soft and frightened when she asked to see the world. All of it, she realized now, had been circling the same unspoken center. Not simply love, but fear of something written about her long before she had any say in it. That night, for the first time, she did not cry for the tower. She burned with the need to know what it had truly been hiding her from. Before we step into the truth together, subscribe to Elf Stories, leave this story a like, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It means more than you know. She found the old healer, Maren, in the lower archive where the Spire's oldest records were kept. Records Liora had never been permitted to enter, until tonight, when desperation made her braver than 2 centuries of obedience ever had. "Tell me about the prophecy," she said, before the old woman could protest. "The one about my birth. I know it exists. I need to hear it from someone who isn't afraid to say it." Maren was quiet a long moment, weighing loyalty against the raw grief in the young woman's face. Finally, she spoke. "When you were born, the seers said a child of King Valen's line would either save our people or end them, that the manner of your growing up would decide which. They could not say more than that. Prophecies rarely give us the mercy of clarity. So he locked me away to keep the ending from happening." "He locked you away?" Maren said gently, "because he could not bear to risk being the father of the version of you that brings ruin. He chose the version of you that never gets the chance to become anything at all, because at least in that version, he still has a daughter to love." Liora sat with that for a long, silent moment, feeling something break open inside her chest. Not shattering, but splitting, the way a seed splits to let something new grow through. "He didn't protect me," she said finally. "He protected himself from losing me. There's a difference, isn't there?" Maren did not answer. She did not need to. Liora asked one more question before leaving the archive, the one she had been most afraid to voice aloud. "Did my mother know? Before she died, did she know what the prophecy said about me?" Maren's silence lasted long enough that Liora already knew the answer before it came. "She was the one who insisted you be raised free, prophecy or not. It was your father's grief after her death that changed his mind, that convinced him fear was safer than the freedom she wanted for you. I have always believed, though I never had the courage to say it to his face, that he mistook his own grief for wisdom and built a tower out of it." The thought settled into Liora like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through everything she had believed about herself. Her mother had wanted her free. It was only her father's fear, grown large enough to swallow a kingdom's worth of good intentions, that had built the walls around her instead. That night, Liora confronted her father in the Great Hall, and for the first time in 200 years, she let every unspoken question fall from her lips at once. "You didn't hide me from the world, because the world was dangerous," she said, voice trembling but unbroken. "You hid me because you were afraid of what I might become in it. You called it love. But love doesn't need a locked door to survive, Father. Only fear does." Valen's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand what it is to watch a prophecy hang over your child's head every single day, to wonder, every time you look at her, whether love is enough to change what was already written. Then you should have let me write it myself," Liora said. "Instead of writing it for me out of fear, it was Darren, brought before the king under guard, who delivered the final blow to the fragile peace of that night. There is something else your daughter should know," he said quietly, meeting Valen's eyes without flinching. "The prophecy was never truly about ruin or salvation, depending on how she was raised. It was about choice. Every seer who studied it agreed on one thing your father never told her, that the ending was never fixed. It was always going to be decided by whether she was free enough when the moment came to choose it herself." The hall fell utterly silent. Valen had spent 2 centuries preventing his daughter from ever facing the choice the prophecy demanded of her, and in doing so, had guaranteed she would face it now, unprepared, in front of everyone, with no time left to grow into the decision at her own pace. "There is a ritual," Darren continued, quieter now, almost gentle in the way he delivered the last piece of the truth. "One that must be completed under the coming moon, when the prophecy's window finally closes. If she chooses to walk into it freely, the darker ending is broken forever. If she is kept from choosing at all, if fear wins one final time, the prophecy resolves itself without her, in whatever way the old magic decides is close enough to what was foretold. And no one can promise that ending is kind." Liora looked at her father. At 200 years of careful, suffocating love finally laid bare as what it truly was, and felt something inside her settle into terrible clarity. She was no longer the girl he had hidden in a tower. She was the woman who would decide, tonight, whether love and fear could finally be separated after 2 centuries of wearing each other's face. If this revelation just broke something open in you too, subscribe to Elf Stories, like this story, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. The hardest choice of all is still ahead. The ritual ground lay an hour's ride from the spire, in a clearing the elves called the Hollow of First Light, where the old magic still pooled thick enough to taste in the air. Liora stood at its edge as the moon rose full and merciless above the trees, and understood, with a calm that surprised her, that she had already made her choice somewhere in the walk here. She simply needed the courage to say it aloud. Valen arrived just before the ritual's window opened, breathless, having ridden faster than a king his age should. He found her standing alone at the hollow's threshold, Darren a respectful distance behind her, and for a moment, father and daughter simply looked at each other across 200 years of silence neither of them had chosen alone. "Please," Valen said, and his voice broke on the word in a way she had never heard from him. "Let me protect you one last time. Walk away from this. Let the magic resolve itself without you standing in its path. That's what you've always asked of me," she said softly, "to let something else decide, so you never have to watch me choose and risk being wrong. I am asking because I love you. I know you are." Her voice did not waver. "That's what makes this so hard, Father. I have never doubted that you love me. I have only ever doubted that your love left room for me to be anything other than safe." She turned toward the hollow, where the old magic shimmered faintly gold beneath the moonlight, waiting. "This is love versus duty for both of us now," she said. "You have spent 2 centuries choosing your duty to keep me safe over my right to be free. Tonight, I choose my duty to become whoever I was always meant to be, over the safety you've built for me instead of with me. And if it costs you everything." Valen's voice cracked entirely now. "All king gone, only father remaining. If the prophecy takes you from me the moment you step inside, then at least it will have taken the woman I chose to become," she said, "not the girl you were too afraid to let me be." Thesic, too, had come, standing a careful distance behind his king, his weathered face unreadable in the moonlight. He had spent 6 centuries enforcing Valen's will without question. But Liora saw something shift in him now. Watching her stand at the edge of a choice his king had spent 200 years trying to prevent her from ever facing. He said nothing. He did not need to. His silence for the first time was not obedience. It was witness. Darren stepped forward then, not to stop her, not to save her, only to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his presence like warmth at her back. "Whatever happens in there," he said quietly, "you won't be facing it because someone else decided it for you. That has to count for something, even if it costs us both." "I used to think," she said, not looking away from the light ahead of her, "that the worst thing my father ever did was keep me in that tower. I don't think that anymore. I think the worst thing he did was make me believe, for 200 years, that I wasn't strong enough to survive whatever waited outside it. I want you to know, whatever happens in there, that he was wrong. I want him to see that he was wrong. He will, Darren said. Whatever else happens tonight, he will see exactly who you are. I promise you that much. She looked at him, at the man who had come searching for a prophecy, and found instead the first person who had ever let her be afraid and brave in the same breath without trying to choose one for her, and felt something settle, warm and certain, beneath the fear. Whatever happens, she said, I'm glad I got to choose it with you beside me. She stepped into the hollow alone. That much, the old magic demanded. Some choices, however loved you are, however loved you have been, can only ever be walked into by yourself. The gold light rose around her, and for a long, suspended moment, the world held its breath. Valen sank to his knees at the hollow's edge, 200 years of careful control finally giving way to something raw and undefended. Darren did not move, did not breathe, watching the only proof of a love he had not expected to find, standing inside a circle of ancient light that could, in the space of a heartbeat, decide to take her from him forever. The light did not consume her. It simply passed through her, gentle as recognition, and where it touched, something old and heavy lifted. Not power granted, not curse broken by force, but a choice finally, fully witnessed by the magic that had been waiting 2 centuries for her to make it herself. When the light faded, Liora was still standing, still herself, still whole. But something in her had changed forever. The last trace of the girl who had waited for permission to exist was gone, and in her place stood a woman who had walked freely into her own fate and decided, with her whole unguarded heart, exactly who she wanted to become. Valen wept at the edge of the hollow, not from grief, but from the particular devastating relief of a father who finally understood, 200 years too late and exactly in time, that loving someone sometimes means opening the door you were always so afraid to build in the first place. If Liora's choice just moved something in you, subscribe to Elf Stories, leave a like, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Stay with me a little longer for how it all settles. The tower still stands at the edge of the elven wood, its window still open to the sky. But the door has one now, carved by Valen's own hand, in the season after the hollow, as an apology that words could never fully carry. Liora does not live behind it anymore. She walks the forest freely now, with Darren beside her more often than not, learning the shape of a world she once only knew in careful fragments. Rivers, mountains, rain finally felt instead of imagined. Valen visits her still, but differently now. He no longer arrives with stories folded small enough to fit inside a locked room. He arrives simply to listen, to a daughter who has finally been given the chance to have a life large enough to tell him about. Some nights, Liora returns to the tower alone, climbs the old stairs, and stands at the window where she once dreamed the world in pieces. She does not stay long. She has learned at last that love was never meant to be a room you're kept inside of. Issa still braids her hair some mornings, though now it is done on a porch overlooking open fields instead of a locked chamber, and the old woman cries a little every time, unashamed, calling it an old servant's foolishness whenever Liora asks why. Thesic, too, has changed in his quiet way. He no longer guards doors meant to keep her in, but walks beside her sometimes on the forest paths, an old soldier finally permitted to protect something by walking alongside it, instead of standing in front of it. Darren stayed, not out of duty, not out of the prophecy that first brought him to these woods, but because, he told her once, some choices are worth making twice, once by fate and once again freely for yourself. She believed him, She had learned better than anyone the difference between the two. It was always meant to be a door, held open, trusting you to choose on your own when to walk through.